He always believed the problem was earning too little. For a long time, that explanation felt obvious. When money was tight, the pressure made sense. Limitations had a clear cause. So when his income finally increased, he felt relief, real relief, as if something that had always been holding him back had finally loosened. Then came another raise, a bonus, more responsibility, the kind of progress people notice. Friends started saying he was doing well now, that he had made it, and on paper, they were right. His paycheck grew, his status followed, but something didn't change. The feeling of being on edge never went away. Every month followed the same pattern. Money came in, passed through his account, and quietly disappeared. There was no obvious luxury, no reckless spending. Still, near the end of the month, he found himself calculating again, delaying decisions, telling himself that next month would be different. He assumed it was just a phase, that he was still adjusting to a higher income, that earning well required a period of stabilization. The problem was, that period never ended. When he looked back honestly, something felt wrong. He was earning more than he ever had before, yet living with the same tension, the same caution, the same constant sense of being close to the edge, without knowing exactly where that edge was. It felt like running on a treadmill that sped up as he did. He worked harder, took on more pressure, accepted more responsibility, not out of ambition, but because he believed that was how progress worked. Still, something didn't add up. It wasn't a lack of effort, it was something else, something invisible, but persistent, and it confused him deeply. Everything he had learned told him that money fixes money, that higher income brings peace, that people who earn well don't live worried. And yet there he was, meeting deadlines, waking up early, being seen as successful on the outside, while calculating the rest of the month on the inside. That's when a question began to form. It didn't arrive fully shaped. It came as a quiet discomfort he couldn't ignore, a doubt he avoided thinking through completely, because it put his entire logic at risk. What if the problem wasn't how much he earned, but what happened to the money while he was earning it? The question had no answer yet, but it had weight, and without realizing it, that was the beginning of something he wasn't ready to face. The shift didn't come through a crisis. It came on an ordinary evening, the kind that leaves no memory. He was sitting at the table, staring at a spreadsheet on his screen. The numbers were organized, categories clearly labeled. Everything looked under control. Rent paid, bills covered, spending within expectations. Nothing appeared wrong, and yet the final number bothered him. The result didn't match the effort. It wasn't anxiety, it was confusion. He started noticing something he had always overlooked. Every time his income increased, his life adjusted around it, quietly, not through conscious decisions, not through indulgence, through subtle changes that felt reasonable at the time. One more subscription for convenience, eating out slightly more often, small monthly payments that didn't seem worth questioning. None of these choices felt wrong on their own. Each came with a justification, efficiency, comfort, a demanding routine. Everything made sense in isolation. The problem was that he never looked at them together. There was never a clear excess, never a breaking point, just normality. A normality that grew at the same pace as his income. Without realizing it, he wasn't using money to change the structure of his life. He was using it to sustain increasingly expensive versions of the same routine. That's when something began to click. The more he earned, the more he needed to keep earning exactly that way. Any interruption felt dangerous. Any unexpected expense triggered immediate tension, not because he spent too much, but because he had built a life that required constant flow to avoid collapsing. Everything worked, as long as nothing changed. He didn't have words for it yet, only a growing sense of pressure he couldn't ignore. And for the first time, he suspected that the problem wasn't the amount coming in, but the automatic decisions he kept making while everything seemed fine. That realization didn't bring clarity. It brought discomfort, the kind that appears when something that always felt logical begins to lose its grip. At first, he tried to fix it the way he always had. He opened a new spreadsheet, adjusted categories, refined numbers, created small personal rules to feel in control again. For a few weeks, it worked. The balance improved slightly. The tension eased. He felt that brief satisfaction of someone who believes they've found the solution. Then life stepped out of the ideal script. A heavier week at work, an unexpected invitation, a simple problem that needed a quick solution. Nothing dramatic, just life happening. And that's where the pattern returned. When the day felt heavier, he didn't stop to choose. He reacted. Money became a shortcut, not a tool. not to change his life, but to make the moment bearable. When he was exhausted, he bought convenience. When frustrated, he bought compensation. When uncertain, he bought a sense of control. None of these choices looked like mistakes. None screamed excess. The issue wasn't the spending itself, but the invisible pattern forming underneath. He realized something uncomfortable. His financial control only existed when everything went well. The moment pressure appeared, the system broke, not because it was flawed, but because it had never been designed to handle real discomfort. Money wasn't organizing his life, it was cushioning it. That explained why earning more never brought lasting relief. Each increase only allowed him to absorb greater pressure. The more demanding his routine became, the more money he needed just to feel stable. Without noticing, he wasn't building margin, he was building dependence. His life had become expensive not because of luxury, but because of fragility. Any slowdown felt threatening. Any pause seemed risky, not because money was missing, but because everything depended on it continuing to arrive without interruption. That realization carried weight. It wasn't fear of losing status. It wasn't fear of becoming poor. It was fear of not being able to sustain his own pace. And for the first time, another thought surfaced, one he had never allowed before. Maybe the problem wasn't spending too much. Maybe it was spending to avoid feeling, spending to get through the day, spending to keep everything functioning without changing the structure. That thought didn't bring answers. It brought silence, a heavy silence, the kind that appears when the logic guiding your decisions begins to crack, not loudly, but enough that it can't fully repair itself. It took time to accept that conclusion, not because it was hard to understand, but because it challenged how he saw himself. He had always believed he was responsible, careful, rational, someone who made good decisions. Admitting that many of his financial choices were reactive, not intentional, was deeply uncomfortable. For a while, he tried to ignore it. He kept working, paying bills, solving problems. From the outside, everything still functioned. Inside, something no longer aligned. That silence followed him, especially in ordinary moments. At the store, grabbing something without thinking. At the end of the day, justifying a small purchase, telling himself, almost automatically, that next month would be the same. That's when he began observing his behavior more closely, not to judge himself and not to control every move, but to understand. He noticed that most spending decisions appeared after some form of tension, a heavy day, an unexpected demand, a quiet comparison with someone else's life. Money entered as a buffer, not as a deliberate tool, but as a fast response, a way to reduce friction without facing it. And the more frequent the pressure became, the more automatic that response grew. He realized something he had never clearly defined before. He had never decided what money was meant to do in his life, whether it existed to maintain the current structure or to create space for change. Without that definition, every decision was improvised, guided by urgency rather than direction. That's when the shift began. Instead of asking how much he could spend, he started asking what the spending was trying to solve in that moment. Sometimes it was fatigue, sometimes anxiety, sometimes habit. Noticing this didn't always change the purchase, but it completely changed the weight of the decision. He began to see that many costs weren't financial. They were structural. They created dependence on constant income, zero room for error, and a persistent feeling of pressure, even when the numbers suggested everything was fine. Earning well hadn't failed him. The belief that earning well was enough had. That realization didn't bring a clear plan. It didn't deliver instant answers, but it gave him something he had never had before, enough clarity to stop repeating the same decisions while expecting a different result. And once that clarity appears, even quietly, it doesn't allow you to return to the previous state. The change itself was subtle. There was no dramatic decision, no bold promise. He didn't decide to save more or redesign his life. He chose something smaller, to interrupt an old reflex, to stop using money as an immediate response to discomfort. The next time he felt the urge to spend without thinking, he didn't forbid it. He didn't resist. He delayed it. A few hours, sometimes a day, long enough for the pressure to ease and the urgency to fade. Often, when he returned to the decision, the impulse no longer made sense. Other times he spent anyway, but now fully aware of what he was trying to ease. That changed something fundamental. Money stopped functioning as an emotional extinguisher and slowly became something else. Not a symbol of luxury or power, but a tool for space. Space to make mistakes without panic. Space to handle a different month without immediate fear. Space to not solve everything right away. Over time, something unexpected happened. He didn't earn more. His routine stayed mostly the same, but the feeling of living on the edge began to fade, not because money piled up, but because margin appeared. Margin for surprises, margin to say no, margin to accept that not everything required instant resolution. That's when the old belief finally lost its grip. Earning well had never been the problem. The problem was building a life that only worked as long as he kept earning well, without interruption. This realization didn't produce a dramatic transformation. There was no sudden leap, but it quietly shifted the axis. And when the axis changes, everything else begins to realign, even slowly. He never became rich. He never experienced a spectacular turnaround, but he stopped living on the edge while earning well. And that was the deepest change of all. For the first time, money stopped deciding for him. His choices came first. Money followed, in the right place, with the right role. When that happens, something subtle but powerful emerges. Fear diminishes, clarity grows, and the future stops feeling like a constant threat. Not because he earned more, but because he stopped spending without understanding what he was trying to fix. And that, quietly, changed everything.